Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So as you may know, Steff tested positive for COVID-19 on Wednesday, and we'll now be isolating for the next 10 days. She's feeling pretty rough, but her symptoms are manageable, which is good news this time. We put out a question box on our Instagram stories to see if anyone had any questions about coronavirus. And as we are almost 99.9% certain that Steff and also myself had it back in March, we thought that maybe we could put the question out there just to see if we can alleviate any concerns or, do our best to sort of help. Testing was not available back in March unless you were hospitalised or you're an NHS staff member. But judging on the symptoms and by talking to a couple of people within the NHS, we were as good as diagnosed without the test. So since then, though, we have had an overwhelming response of questions since obviously putting out that question box. Also, many people wishing Steff to get better, so thank you very much for that. So we thought that it would be a good idea to team up with someone very close to us who has been the biggest help to us, to be fair, throughout 2020 in alleviating any concerns that we had about the virus, answering any questions that we had, and we're really, really grateful to have had someone like that in our lives. So our good friend Jo, she was one of the first nurses at Nightingale London. For those of you that say it wasn't used, it certainly was. Jo actually held our hand virtually throughout the whole first time that we potentially contracted the virus, and answered all of our questions back then. So here today, Jo will be joining us to answer 3 of the most common questions that we have had over the past few days.
And here's Jo. She has come all the way on Zoom. So as I was saying, we've obviously got Jo joining us on the video today, and we're going to be talking all things COVID. This is like a loose women panel show, isn't it? God. So Jo has been a nurse for 10 years now. You're a veteran.
I'm old.
You are old, babes. You are. No, I'm joking. You're not really. One of the biggest questions we've had is, can you catch COVID twice?
Yes, you can definitely catch COVID twice. We think people at the minute who have had it quite severely, say if you've been hospitalised or if you've been in intensive care, you develop a bigger immune response. So you probably will have more antibodies. However, we know that those antibodies decrease over time and you're susceptible to having it again. Even if you've had it mildly, you can also catch it again. Okay. So it's really important to maintain all your precautions, your mask, hand washing, and be really, really careful, because even if you've had it severely or mildly, you can catch it twice.
A lot of people seem to maybe have this this idea that it's going to be like, oh, you won't get it for like another year or 2 years, or something like that. But just to give you an example of Steff, if she did have it back in March, this is only 6 months later now, 7 months.
Yeah, later. And that ties in with what we currently know and think about coronavirus, that after 6 months, the antibodies have depleted to a much lower level. So at this point, she was probably a bit more susceptible.
Many people were also messaging us saying, how do I know if I have COVID? Now, obviously, we know the normal symptoms, but this is, again, the thing with Steff. So Steff started off just with mild fatigue. She felt a bit run down. Then she actually started to feel a bit congested. So we thought it may be a cold. And then obviously that's when the sort of cough set in. So what would you say from what you've seen have been the main or the biggest symptoms that you've seen with people with COVID?
Yeah, the main symptoms don't all come together. That's the thing I've observed most. A lot of people have been getting the fever, maybe even last. So that's not the first thing that you might notice. Yeah. Often the first thing is just fatigue. People feel absolutely exhausted early on. Then you might develop a cough. Then you might have sinusy congestion problems. Mm-hmm. Then you might get a fever. It really depends. Sometimes these symptoms are dragged out over a week or 2, but they don't often all come together. Yeah. Also important to say that you might not know you've got it. You might have no symptoms, which is what we call asymptomatic.
So potentially, like me right now, I feel absolutely fine. So this is another example, and I suppose a bit of a scare factor as to how this virus is obviously continuing to spread. So, you know, you show symptoms, you go for a test, you get diagnosed, and then you self-isolate. But for myself, who was obviously, I feel fine. I've not got a temperature. I've not got any of the symptoms that they've said. And before that, I was going into work when Steff was still testing. Well, not testing, but Steff was still technically positive. I was obviously at work. So that's how it spreads. And I think that people do need to be quite vigilant about that.
Yeah, and especially like yourself, when you're living with someone who has tested positive, you need to be well informed and isolate with them, because you can't just go off to work, go to the supermarket, and you may have it. So
very true. The last question, which I think is probably one of the main questions. Now, there's a lot of people now that are quite well informed. You know, this has been going on since March. We're now in October. So, you know, not everyone's been living under a rock. But I do appreciate that a lot of people are quite anxious about what the test is like, or just more curious. So, you know, one of the other biggest questions that we got was, what's the test like? Does it hurt?
Yeah, I think initially there was quite a bit of fear mongering and anxiety about the test, but it really is pretty quick, straightforward. It's not painful. I would say it's mild discomfort, but like I say, it's quick. So this is the swab. It's just like a really fine cotton bud, really.
Yeah.
Now, there are some variations depending on where you go, but most places you do back of the throat, swill it around for 10 seconds, and then 1 or 2 nostrils. And it does go quite far up. I won't do it.
No, don't do it.
But, you know, just so you can see, it's not big and scary. It's just the back of your throat and the nostrils.
Yeah. And to reassure, actually, anyone that is going to be getting the test, or anyone that's worried about getting the test. So Steff is somebody that she's got quite when she takes vitamins that are too strong, she gags. Like she's got quite a strong gag reflex. And I was in the car with her when she was doing the test, and she did it, and it was absolutely fine. Like, you know, when she was doing it, it was like a little bit of discomfort. But if Steff was fine, everyone else is going to be fine. Like,
if Steff can do it,
if
you
Steff
can do it.
You can do it. Don't let it put you off. Just that, you know, obviously people are saying mild discomfort. It's something that needs to be done. Like, don't ever let that be something that puts you off getting a test either.
It's so important to know if you've got it or not. Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely. All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Jo. You've been amazing.
No problem.
Another massive thank you to Jo for coming on and answering those questions. I think that it is important at this stage just to remind people to be vigilant. This is a great example of how not invincible you can be. So obviously we thought, and we're still pretty convinced that Steff and I had the virus back in March, and we're now in October 2020. Do we need a reminder? And she's tested positive. So I also just want to put out sort of like a mild disclaimer there that I myself am not an expert. You know, Jo's not a scientist. She's just a nurse that's not just a nurse, but she's a nurse that has been on the front line throughout this pandemic. I've witnessed it firsthand through family, friends, Steff and myself. And just to give you an idea of how this can spread. So as an example, Steff just started off feeling run down, which I think that we've all experienced it, especially this time of year. And she says even now at this point, she still wouldn't have thought that she'd have the virus had she not been tested positive. So I think it's very important to remind you, just again, to just be super vigilant with stuff like this. So what happened was Steff obviously started to experience fatigue, and then she started to get a bit of a sore throat and a few of the other symptoms. That's when she obviously booked in for a test. From the point that she booked in for the test is when Steff and I started self-isolating. So I called up work. I said that my partner is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and she's had a test, and we will let them know the results. Obviously it came back positive, so that's where our self-isolation period starts. It's a 14-day self-isolation period. The symptoms at this stage, they're manageable, and we hope that they continue the same. So if you're experiencing any of the symptoms that we're all aware of, then you can apply for a test online. This is UK only advice. And if you are unable to get a test online, then you can call 119 if you're in England, Wales or Northern Ireland, or 0300 303 2713 if you're in Scotland. The lines are open 7 to 11, but you should have no problem theoretically getting the test online. So we hope that this has been informative, a little bit morbid than our usual sort of FaceTime, but thank you very much for watching, and if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.